Do you want me to talk about Christopher from the Gilmore Girls? My name is Gina. I'm an author, editor, publishing professional. I help you make your writing better. I am not going to talk about Christopher in the same way that I talked about Dean because he is not a walking red flag in the same way, but I am going to talk about Christopher in a way that I think is really useful for writers to take a lesson from him and the way that he was worked into the show. So Christopher was Rory's father. Lorelai was a teen mom. Christopher was a teen dad. They made it very clear in the Dear Emily and Richard episode where they flashed back and showed her pregnancy and like birthing story that Lorelai was the one making all of the decisions. Christopher really didn't want to be a teen dad, so it is therefore no surprise that he has been an absentee father. But if you are not deep in the Gilmore Girls lore, you might not know that Amy Sherman Palladino, who was the head writer and who was a very controlling writer, and I know that that word is often used as a negative, but in this case, I actually respect her for this, that she had a vision for what this story was going to be, and she did not want to deviate from it. She had a plan for these characters, and as long as she was in charge, that plan was working. But she had always planned what the last four words of this show were always going to be. It was always going to be, Mom, yeah, I'm pregnant. That was always going to be the last of the show. Now, you have no idea how long a TV show is going to be on the air. So they started the show while Rory was 16 years old and she gets admitted to prep school. Her mom has taken her out of the 1% world and raised her as a working class family. But Rory gets accepted into this prep school and is now being surrounded by all of these prep school kids that her mom wanted to keep her away from in the first place. So you can see how if the show was canceled at the end of one season, Rory repeating all of her mother's mistakes would be a bombshell. Even if she does it at the end of high school, if they got canceled after season 3, Mom, I'm Pregnant, still a bombshell. Even if she had done it at the end of season 7, where the show sort of naturally ended when Rory was finishing college, we're still seeing echoes of this young mom not prepared for the life that she is taking on. It's interrupting and derailing all of her dreams. This is a really good ending to this show. So, since Amy Sherman Palladino was a good writer and was writing a very good story, and you can take what you already know about parallels and foils and story arcs and all of these things, and you can see very quickly what the intention of this was. Rory was going to be repeating all of her mother's mistakes. So she was going to be pregnant at a young age in which she was unprepared from a prep school guy. So that is part of why that's what the story is. Christopher was never meant to be the person for Lorelai. He's always supposed to be a mistake. Even when they got very close in season 2 to being a real relationship, they keep yanking this story away from us. And then as soon as they get together, literally within the same episode, you think that they are going to have their happy ever after moment. He immediately breaks it off, like literally the very next morning, and says, nope, my girlfriend is pregnant. I'm going to go be there for her this time. So he is trying to atone for the sins of his past, but he is doing it through Sherry, through the new family, rather than with Lorelai. This was never supposed to be Endgame. And part of, again, what makes Gilmore Girls so interesting and so fascinating decades after it first started airing is that you can argue about this. You can argue about whether or not Chris and Lorelai make a good couple, whether or not they are good for each other, whether or not he really loves her, if he's just in love with the idea of her, whether or not she should have. Like, you can continue to have these debates because these characters are so messy and intricate and interesting, and they make real decisions that there aren't good, clean, nice answers to. And honestly, I should do a video one time about this breakup here and how it is a really classic example, a really, really good example of just being super mean to your characters and not letting anybody off the hook. But something happens to this show. At the end of season 6, Gilmore Girls is the cornerstone property on the WB. It is their most successful show. It is their most watched show. It is in syndication on multiple different networks at the same time while it is being aired live. This is a runaway success. It is a cultural phenomenon. It is a huge deal. But the WB is merging with the UPN and they are creating the CW. And the CW is saying that they're only keeping the best shows from each of those networks, and Gilmore Girls is the #1 show across both networks. So it is definitely going to be kept. But Amy Sherman Palladino sees this, and I'm not entirely sure what her motivations are. I have heard different versions of this. I'm not going to try to put words in her mouth as to like what her reasoning for this is. But in the end, she says, great, yes, we'll come over there, but I need a bigger staff of writers. I need a bigger budget. I need more people helping me make this big monster of a show. And CW basically says, nope, we're not doing that. That's too expensive. You can take a hike. And so she does. And so she walks away, and she never watched season 7. Season 7 was written by a whole bunch of different people, and it feels like it. Like, it is kind of tonally all over the place. They have Christmas in the show for the very first time, like they do Christmas episodes for the first time. The show just feels very different. And the irony is that they ended up having to hire a whole bunch of people to replace Amy Sherman Palladino because nobody could do what she was doing. She had her fingerprints all over this show, and the show suffered for it. But it suffered in the biggest way, that they tried to make Lorelai and Christopher endgame. And I remember at the time, Lauren Graham was going around doing a bunch of press because this is the final season. They're not going to do anything more after this. Like, this is a big deal. They're wrapping up this show. And there was a lot of talk of like, oh, did Amy Sherman Palladino tell you guys what the final 4 words were going to be? Because this was part of like the lore of the show, of the fandom. Did she tell you what those words were going to be so you can incorporate them? And she was like, no, that's her artistic vision. We really are taking this in the direction that we want to. And she tried to justify Lorelai and Christopher across all of these interviews. And so they end up eloping in one of the just the stupidest episodes of TV that I've ever seen in my whole life. It is real dumb. And so they end up eloping, and then they spend like 3 or 4 episodes like trying to convince you that this is a real marriage when she's like clearly in love with Luke the whole time, and he's clearly just like grasping at straws. Like, they try really hard to make this work. But they go on, like, she goes on and is like, no, I really do think that he's the one for her. I really think. And fans were furious. Fans hated this. And by the end of the season, they're totally and completely broken up, rightfully so. These two do not belong together. They don't belong together as characters, but like from a story arc perspective, it doesn't make any sense for her to wind up with the guy. Like, this wasn't a second chance romance. This is like overcoming a lot of really bad and hurtful blood that he never really apologized for. Like, it's bad storytelling to have them wind up together. It wouldn't have felt full circle. It would have felt like a fallback plan. So, but she's going around like Lauren Graham is defending this, and that's her job, right? Like, she is an actress, she has a contract, she's supposed to be saying positive things about the show while she is promoting it. She's literally trying to get people to keep watching this show. And so she's saying like, yeah, no, I think this is great that they're going to wind up together. And then when they come back for the revival, she was doing more press, and people were like, do you remember saying this back in 2007? She was like, what? I never would have said that. And people had to like play videos back for her and be like, no, look, you said this. And she was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that. So she was just saying what she needed to say for her contract, because that's the way that this stuff works. But the people who were writing the show, they had lost sight of who these characters were. They had lost sight of what this arc was. They had lost sight of the Gilmore Girls, that this was a story about this mother-daughter combo, and it was about the new generation repeating the mistakes of the past generation, but doing it in their own messy way. That's what the arc of this show was really supposed to be about. And you see this play out in multiple episodes, in the Cotillion episode and in the Thank Heaven for Little Girls, the coming out, the debutante episode. You see all of these chances for Lorelai to be like, oh no, she's doing all of the things that I didn't want her to do. Oh gosh, you can see it happening, but then it just never quite comes full circle. So Christopher Hayden is a complicated character. He is a messy character. He is really, really good TV. I think that he's really well written up until season 7, where he just kind of becomes a jealous, douchey guy because the people who were writing on this show didn't have the overall vision that the original creators had for it. Now, they are also TV writers. They are being asked to step in on a hugely successful show that has a lot of lore associated with it. I don't know how difficult that job is. That sounds like a nightmare to try to do that job. And they put together some TV that was very juicy and very interesting to watch, and I certainly don't know that anybody else could have stepped in and done it any better in the role that they were being asked to fill. But because they didn't have the overall vision, they didn't know what the final arc was supposed to look like, they took a character that had been interesting and messy and had really been a plot device to push Lorelai into certain behaviors, and they turned him into just kind of a douchey, jealous guy, and it ends up falling flat. And I think that's a big reason why he's not really involved in the revival, other than to tell Rory that she should go ahead and do what she's planning to do without knowing what he's advising her on. And he ends up advising her to keep the baby.